Okay, is my timer ready? Are my judges ready? Is my opposition side ready? You guys ready? Climate change is happening, humans are causing it, and I think it is perhaps the most serious environmental issue facing us. Bill Nye the Science Guy. Hello, my name is Ahmed Taufik. I am the introductory speaker for the proposition side of developed countries should fund projects to mitigate the impact of climate change in developing countries. Climate change is a global issue. We all live on the same earth. No one country is protected from the effects of climate change and global warming. Climate change is a global problem that we, us, as all members of one earth, must fight together head on. The average temperature on Earth has risen about 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the 20th century. Islands all over the Pacific are being affected by rising sea levels. Temperature is estimated to rise at least 4 degrees hotter within the next 100 years. By 2100, it is estimated that the sea will rise 39.4 inches. Recently, countries like India, Cambodia, Bangladesh, China, have all suffered from devastating flood, or may be predicted to suffer from devastating flood. And that's just to name a few countries. Which brings me to my next assertion. Undeveloped countries are sometimes affected the most by climate change, even though they contribute the least. Nations in the South Pacific, such as the Marshall Islands, live very humble lives with very little to no electricity and little to no driving, which means they hardly contribute to the climate change. But if ocean levels continue to rise, these islands will be completely underwater. Generations will be swept away. The average carbon emission rate per capita in the Marshall Islands is 1.96 metric tons per year, while the average carbon emissions rate per capita in the US is 16.4 metric tons of carbon emissions per year. 5 islands in the Pacific have already disappeared. 6 islands have severe shoreline recession. More than 20% of their land is gone. This has dislocated many villagers. It's forcing people out of their homes and out of their islands into more populated countries, such as the US and France, in turn contributing more to carbon emissions. This is just talking about sea levels rising, but other third world countries are suffering and are predicted to suffer just as well. Malawi, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and India is likely to suffer from extreme devastating drought. Bangladesh, China, India, Cambodia, like I said earlier, will likely suffer from extreme devastating flood. And it's also predicted that the Philippines, Bangladesh, Madagascar, Vietnam will also suffer from devastating storm if we do not act soon. One thing we can do is, if undeveloped countries, start using more energy generated by fossil fuels, this will increase the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But if they continue to develop and increase their energy demands, we need to start them off with using clean energy. This will help the Earth in the future and prevent them from increasing the speed of climate change at the speed it is going at. It is easier to stop undeveloped countries from using fossil fuels and instead to get them to use clean energy, because these countries are not really heavily reliant on fossil fuels, like developed countries like us. It is projected by 2040, the world energy demand will be around 75% higher than it was in 2015. Thank you.
Are my opponents ready? Judges ready? Timer ready? Hi, my name is Evan Kagimoto, and I'd like to begin my argument by rebutting some of the assertions that were just given, and then adding some assertions of my own to further support our argument. First off, I'd like to start by saying that I strongly negate the resolution that developed countries should fund projects to mitigate the impact of climate change in developing countries. My opponent said that undeveloped countries contribute the least to climate change. Well, that's wrong, because they contribute 63% of the world's carbon emissions. And my opponent also said that countries like India and China are suffering due to climate change, but they are one of the most wealthy countries in the world, and if anything, could fight climate change or have the most effect on climate change, even though they're a developing country. My first additional assertion is that large developing countries are already wealthy enough to lead on climate change. Countries like China, India, and Brazil are examples of wealthy developing countries and are among one of the 20 wealthiest countries in the world. As a result, it'd be wrong to assume that developing countries do not have money to spare on a fight for climate change. They host some of the world's largest industries, and they have plenty of resources through a broad tax base to make major state investments in green technologies. They are just as obligated, if not more obligated, to fight global warming. My second additional assertion is that the US and other developed countries already have problems of their own. Yes, they have money and power, but does that make them obligated to help developing countries? No. Countries like the US have diseases to worry about, liver, heart, Alzheimer's. We also have people who are homeless or living without health insurance. Shouldn't a country's first priority be to the citizens? Yes. As of January 2015, 564,708 citizens were homeless on a given night. 15% of that homeless population was considered chronically homeless individuals. Also, 15.4%, which is 48 million people in the US, are without health insurance. Between feeding homeless and providing health insurance alone to the citizens would result in over $100 billion. Therefore, we obviously have problems. These developed countries clearly have enough problems on their hands. And my third assertion, lastly, the developing countries already have a bigger obligation to fighting climate change. Developing countries are responsible for 63% of the world's CO2 emissions. In 2010, developing countries were leading the world's greenhouse gas emissions and energy release by 54%. That statistic is estimated to be at 65% by 2020, says the United States Energy Information Administration. Over the next 3 decades, energy consumption is predicted to grow at a 2.2% annual clip in non-OECD, which is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. OECD nations, including Europe, the US, Canada, and Australia, in contrast, will see their energy use increase by just 0.5% a year, roughly in line with population growth. These numbers demonstrate what could be a climate change catastrophe. Developing countries like China and India will show the most increase in energy consumption because they rely on carbon-polluting coal and other fossil fuels to generate electricity. Greenhouse gas emissions grew a record 2.1% as of 2012. About 57% of global greenhouse gas emissions originated from developing countries. Countries like China and India accounted for a third of the worldwide carbon swoop. Thank you. I yield all remaining time to the chair.
Are my judges ready? Is my timekeeper ready? Are my opponents ready? Hi, my name is Jaron, and I strongly oppose the opposition to that developed countries should fund projects to mitigate the impact of climate change in developing countries. So I would like to start off by rebutting my opponent's arguments. So the opposition stated that undeveloped countries contribute the most. Well, that is simply untrue. You stated that 67% of CO2 emissions come from undeveloped countries, but at the same time, you also stated that 63% of the emissions come from developed countries. Okay? And okay, next you stated that countries like China and India are rich. So countries like China and India, for example, India's average income is below $1,500 per household. And you also said that countries don't have enough money to support the undeveloped countries. Well, fixing the climate all over the world is more important than having debt. If our Earth is destroyed, what is the point of money? If climate change continues to destroy our countries, the cost of repairing it would be massive at the same time. Sea level rise affects freshwater sources, coastal sediments, and vital economic activities. Small islands will be devastated by the rising sea levels. A reason for developed countries for not helping developing countries is because of expenses. But this global issue is extremely urgent and important that any amount of money being spent towards this issue is a necessary amount. Globally, heat waves, hurricanes, severe thunderstorms, and flooding are becoming more frequent and increasingly intense with climate change. There are many examples of extreme weather patterns all over the world. Typhoon Haiyan, for example, it killed around 6,300 people. It was a Category 5 typhoon. It had sustained winds of 195 miles per hour, and it caused around $14 billion in damage. And it also caused a 6 to 7 meter storm surge, similar to a tsunami. According to the Fifth Assessment Report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a report made by 259 of the world's leading scientists released in 2013, they said, without substantial and sustained reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, the world will experience more extreme weather. There are countless examples of the weather getting more extreme. For example, there is even one in the US, Hurricane Sandy. It caused $72.1 billion worth of economic damage, and 149 people died. Renewable energy is also cheaper in the long run and is an easy solution to prevent climate change. And it also stimulates job growth in undeveloped countries. Take Pennsylvania, for example. Renewable energy has created more than 3,000 high-paying jobs and created 600 businesses. And only 4,000 systems were installed there since 2008. Imagine if the world's population is 7 billion people. Imagine how many jobs this new field will create. Another example of why we should expand solar and renewable energies in developing countries is that in the future, like my partner stated earlier, the world energy demand will increase by 75% by 2040. Currently, 1.3 million people live without electricity. 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa and 300 million in India. India has around 85 billion metric tons of hard coal at its disposal. They are planning to build coal plants to generate power, but imagine how much energy, energy they will need to produce and how much carbon dioxide that will produce. Imagine how much faster that will speed up climate change, which is already growing at an exponential rate. Also, another thing that we should do in undeveloped countries is help enforce the government. An example of why we should help is Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. The government accepts many bribes. A company called Rio Tinto from Australia have a mine in West Papua, Indonesia, named Grasberg. They have been accused by Norway of dumping 230,000 tons of waste rock into a local river, polluting it with sulfuric acid and other toxic chemicals. There are other incidents that are a perfect example of this. Rusili Zainal, an Indonesian governor, was sentenced to 14 years in prison in order to pay $90,000 because he was accepting bribes for illegal logging permits to palm oil producers. Another Indonesian official was arrested for being in charge of an illegal logging operation worth $150 million. Companies are burning forests to grow palm oil plantations. Burning 1 hectare of forest can release 600 tons of carbon dioxide. Companies have a plan to build 4 million hectares of palm oil plants, and 1 hectare equals around 2 acres. Imagine how much carbon dioxide that will release into the atmosphere. Thank you.
Are you guys ready? Are my judges ready? And is the timekeeper ready? Alright. For the sake of our country and other developed countries, what if I told you that we're better off by not giving money to help climate change in poor countries? My name is Lam Van Osdal, and our team negates the resolution that developed countries should fund projects to mitigate the impact of climate change on developing countries. I would like to start off by rebutting the proposition proof. Also, my rebuttals ties into my assertions. So, my opponent said that money, the scientist says hurricanes can happen, such as the Hurricane Sandy. Money is a very big problem And money is a huge issue to get rid of climate change, and it's just too much. Renewable energy also takes time and money, which we do not have. India needs to industrialize with a coal plant, becoming a developed nation. And CO2 levels are rising, but that does not mean that climate change is real, or it's more of a theory. We are pledging so much money and have done already, and nothing has happened. We're wasting precious money. And that is my first assertion. We are currently spending $1.5 trillion annually according to the Climate Change Business Journal. To put that in perspective, $1 trillion can pay a year's salary for 18 million teachers. US government officials would save $100 billion over 8 years by cutting all federal climate change spending, a sum their campaign says would be achieved by eliminating domestic and international climate programs. The estimate was based on a Congressional Research Service report in 2013 that looked at federal climate change funding from fiscal year 2008 to the report in 2013 and the budget request for 2014. During this time, the public was already criticizing the Obama administration for spending billions and billions, which we could ultimately spend that money to heal our land and make it greener and better. We cannot go out and tell others to start reducing CO2 emissions when ourselves are also releasing it. This leads to my second assertion. My second additional assertion is the focus is our home nation, not surrounding nations and developed and undeveloped countries. It is not sensible to start reaching out to other countries until America herself is free from climate change. Developing countries in total still need some 8 years of funding to show some visible evidence of lowering climate change, according to a report by Oxfam, a charitable organization focused on the alleviation of global poverty. If it is going to take this long to reach many countries, what will the benefits be if you put all that money into our country? This assertion also ties into my first, but I want to make it clear that we're setting a bad example by making others make reforms for climate change when that money could be beneficial for the US, and we shouldn't be focusing on other countries right now because we're the ones releasing it. Also, my third additional assertion is action is not really necessary, nor money is necessary, because climate change is more of a theory, not proven fact, and there is evidence that supports that. NASA released a satellite that measures CO2 levels called the Orbiting Carbon Observatory 2. Much to their surprise, most of the emissions came from rainforests in South America and Africa. The US was only one of the medians of the measurements. That report can also be seen on the NASA website. The upswing in temperature started from 1975, continued until 1997, and the temperature has been flat since then, which clearly states that there isn't any significant change in temperature in the last 17 years. Al Gore, an American politician and environmentalist who served as the 45th Vice President of the United States, predicted that all Arctic ice would be gone by 2013. But on contrary, Arctic ice is up by 50% since 2012. Al Gore, this man, has stated in the past that inhaling CO2 can make you quote-unquote stupid. How can we trust a man that has said such bogus quotes? James Hansen of NASA fame predicted that the West Side Highway in New York would be underwater by now because of global warming, which it is clearly not. If scientists have repeatedly gotten data wrong in the past, how can we trust that climate change is indeed man-made? Over 31,000 scientists have signed on to a petition saying that humans are not causing global warming. I yield the rest of my time to the chair. I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
My opponent's ready? Are my judges ready? Okay. Is my timer ready? Okay. Hello, my name is Hayden Lameth, and I'm the third and final speaker for the opposition side. My group and I strongly negate the resolution that states developed countries should fund projects to mitigate the impact of climate change in developing countries. Today, I will first start off by rebutting points that my previous opponent made, then I will restate our assertions and some of our best arguments to weigh out the debate. My opponent said that developing countries are suffering the most and developed countries are creating the most emission, but that clearly states why we shouldn't fund developing countries, because if developed countries are creating the most, we should spend the money to fix our country and not to help other countries that aren't doing anything. Now to restate my team's 6 assertions. Our first assertion stated that large developing countries are already wealthy enough to lead on climate change. Our second assertion stated that the US and other developed countries already have their own problems. Our third assertion stated that developing countries already have a bigger obligation to fighting climate change. Our fourth assertion stated that too much money has already been given and nothing has happened. Our fifth assertion stated that focus should be on developed countries' home nation, not surrounding developed nations. And lastly, our sixth and final assertion stated that action is not necessary, nor is money. Now I review the opposition side best arguments. One was that if scientists believe developed countries are affecting the climate the most with their CO2 emissions, then why should developed countries spend the money on developing countries where instead they could be using the money to clean up their country to their CO2 levels? Another one of our best arguments is that developed countries like the US have their own problems that they have to worry about that does not have to do with climate change. By helping developing countries cope with this theory of climate change, developed countries are completely neglecting more pressing matters that they have, like poverty or homelessness. One of our other best arguments is that climate change is more of a theory than a proven fact. There are many reasons why climate change is not a proven fact, such as there is not enough historical data to back up climate change. Also, early predictions made by scientists have been often proven wrong. For example, Al Gore is an environmentalist, and he predicted that the Arctic ice would melt, but it has actually grown 50% since 2012. By fulfilling these resolutions, countless numbers of people will be affected because they would either be saved from poverty and homelessness, and the world would eventually become more green. The chances of these resolutions coming true is low, but if the countries take matters into their own hands, who knows what will happen. And this will not happen immediately. This will have more of a long-term effect because developed countries will become more green and fix their problems. And it'll also give developing countries a chance to lead on their own. Thank you, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Hello, my name is. Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready?
Yeah, all right.
The timer is ready. No, the judge is ready. Hi, my name is Duke Kenny, and my group is in proposition to the resolution that developing countries should fund projects to mitigate the impact of climate change in developing countries. First, I will refute some of the arguments that were made by the opposing team, and then I will back up what my team has already stated. The other team stated that climate change is a theory and not an actual thing. That's absurd. 5 islands in the Marshall Island chain have already gone underwater, and 6 more are nearly sunk. The national temperature has risen by over 1.5 degrees since the Industrial Revolution, and the water levels have risen substantially. They say that we cannot afford it because we have more pressing issues such as homelessness and illness, but the most pressing issue is our Earth and climate change. Fixing climate change anywhere will benefit us everywhere. Sorry, I can't.
So, our opponent said that America can't be free from climate change until the entire planet is free from it. So basically what we're just saying is, although we may be contributing more to it now, in the future, imagine how much faster it would go along if these undeveloped countries start using more energy, like we said before. Like we also stated directly in my last argument that the world energy usage, the world energy demand will increase by 75% by 2040. And the thing that you said, money could be used for the U.S. Imagine how many homeless and refugees will come from like coastal cities and islands flooding. Imagine how much more money in the future we will be spending on these things, like helping homeless people that have been affected from climate change. Already 5 islands in the Marshall Islands have gone under, and more are on the way, and there are people living in those islands. So what will happen to those refugees when the islands flood? And a lot of it has dislocated a lot of villagers, and it's forcing them into countries like U.S. and France, like contributing, and that in turn causes them to use more, contribute more to climate change. And climate change.